think that the reform that has the most overall consensus right now is a push for more African members to have a permanent, or any African members to have a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. The big push in UN reform is to change the format of the Security Council to allow for more permanent members. There are currently only being five, that being France, the US, the UK, Russia, and China. The one issue that everyone seems to have consensus on is that an African member state, or two, which is the kind of formal African position, should be able to also share in this permanent member status at the Security Council. Now, this is the issue with the most momentum. It's not necessarily the most realistic, unfortunately. And that's because any major reform to the UN Security Council and its membership would require amendment of the UN Charter. And that requires not just a two-third majority of member states, but also all of those permanent five members I mentioned earlier to agree upon this, not just at the national head of state level, but also at their legislators. Now, in this day and age, and especially in this political climate, it's going to be a very difficult thing to accomplish, which is why UN reform at that kind of highest level of membership reform, while incredibly important, is also unrealistic in this current moment. So the middle powers have actually taken an incredibly strong role in this debate. There's a group called the G4, which is pushing for their own seat to the Security Council. They believe that, you have India, South Korea, Germany, Japan, and they've been taking a very active and vocal role. You also have a number of smaller powers who have been taking a really active role in brainstorming for this. I think that the UN is facing a bit of a legitimacy crisis right now. This is in accordance to its, inability to engage at the way that many are wanting it to on some of these major crises. Now, this isn't totally the fault of the United Nations. In some instances, they're sidelined, sometimes for good reason. Other times, it's power politics at play, which don't allow the UN to play, for example, the mediation role that it might want to play in a certain conflict. Now, I think the Secretary General is very cognizant of this. And as a response to that, he decided to convene what he's calling a summit of the future. And this will be happening at the end of September, where he is asking all of the high-level leaders of the world to come together ahead of the UN General Assembly and to attempt to deal with the new and emerging challenges that are facing the UN. It's his recognition that the UN in many ways is at a critical juncture point where it needs to learn how to adapt to things like AI, right? Things like the growing youth bulge around the world. And so he's having member states come together, draft up a pact of the future to essentially establish a plan for moving forward on these issues. Now, some will be more effective than others. Specifically, I'm not as optimistic that the International Peace and Security chapter of this Summit of the Future is going to be anything groundbreaking, but it is going to be an important reaffirmation of the principles that underwrite the UN system. The Pact of the Future and the Summit of the Future is more about the UN and its operations writ large than its engagement in individual countries. But one of the things in which I think is going to be important when dealing with some of the major conflicts right now is a reestablishment and a rededication to tangible principles such as territorial integrity, for example, which are, core to the UN's charter, core to the way the international community works, but have been violated by multiple actors over the past few years. And so this is an opportunity for the international community to come together and strongly reaffirm those principles. Now, realistically, is it going to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Is it going to stop Israel's incursion into the occupied Palestinian territories? No, but this is what the UN is attempting to do right now. I think that the international financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the regional banks, play an incredibly important role in managing international peace and security and in being able to provide the funding necessary for, many of the operations that lead to development and preventing a reneging into conflict writ large. There needs to be increased cooperation between these international financial institutions and the UN. A failure to do so means that the people who are most affected on the ground are not being, are not receiving the help and the full scale of benefits that they could from the international community.